Okay, so our second figure who influenced the existentialists and sort of was at the very beginning of this movement was Friedrich Nietzsche. And Nietzsche, he was kind of like Kierkegaard in that he didn't like the way philosophy and religion had been practiced up to his time, but he had a completely different reaction and way he wanted to go with it than Kierkegaard, most importantly, because Nietzsche was not a Christian. But he also thought that philosophy had sort of gone in the wrong direction and that they needed to be a study of human beings, more like psychology or history. And so he kind of wanted to do that, but he didn't really do that. That's what he claimed he wanted to do. But he didn't, contrary to popular belief, he really didn't think the idea of God was unimportant, or that he didn't really make fun of the idea of God. It was instead sort of the idea that, well, God, or our idea of God at least, helped us decide what was morally right. And so when we'll get to this in a minute, but The Genealogy of Morality was his book where he kind of analyzed the idea of good and evil and morality in this sort of weird faux history kind of way. He pretty much made up this history in which pagan leaders defined goodness and badness as nobility and ignobility. So the idea was that the upper classes defined good as being what they were and the traits that they had, and called the things that the lower classes did or were as bad. And this, again, didn't necessarily happen the way he said. It was just his sort of allegory, I suppose you would say. So then, according to him, what happened, and again, this isn't what really happened, but this is a little faux history, is that the priestly class, who were, the sort of God-fearing people, the priests became jealous of the aristocrats, and because of this, the priests said, well, we're going to redefine good as suffering and powerlessness, and they sort of got the lower classes to revolt, according to him, and overthrow morality and make goodness and badness as they had been defined, where goodness was what the rich people were and badness was what the poor people were. They overturned that in favor of this idea of good and evil. So what's the difference between good and bad and good and evil? For Nietzsche, it was that good and evil were designed by the Christian church, and that Jesus Christ was supposed to be the epitome of good, which is self-denial, altruism, and poverty. And then evil became greed, power, and lust. So it kind of turned over, kind of backwards to the way it was. So, again, he says that the priests used the lower classes to sort of get revenge on the aristocrats by having them revolt in this way and say, well, poverty is really good and not greed and wealth. And Nietzsche claims that this, quote, history has been forgotten because it actually worked. He says, well, we forget this, but that's because, we've really embodied this, or we've really internalized this idea of good and evil, so we don't even think about it anymore. But he doesn't think this was a good thing. He says that the morality of guilt emerged as part of this idea of altruism, and Jesus Christ is trying to make people feel guilty if they don't give their stuff to other people. And so encourage people to turn against themselves and feel guilty for things like having money, for example. And suffering, under the Christian view, according to him, is seen as punishment, whereas he thinks that suffering is just part of the human condition. So this is related to his idea then, which he brings up elsewhere, that God is dead, and what does this mean? So this was in his book, The Gay Science, which is also called something else. I've forgotten the other title. So he kind of dramatizes this by putting the pronouncement of the death of God in the mouth of a madman who's speaking to a group of atheists. The atheists are not the good guys, it's important to note, according to Nietzsche. But in any case, they don't believe the madman who gives up and goes away. They think that God is still around, but they just don't really believe in God. So Nietzsche doesn't really necessarily believe in God either, but he still thinks that this quote, death of God is a sort of upheaval for humankind, and it's a destructive thing, and that it's not necessarily a good thing because people got their morality from God, and without God they're not going to have an idea of morality anymore. So he worried that it would lead to nihilism or the belief in nothing at all. And the idea, some people say that Nietzsche is a nihilist. This isn't really true. And you can see that if you look at the passage where he's talking about God being dead. The madman is upset that God is dead. It's like a bad thing. It's not a good thing. And he doesn't identify with the atheists who just laugh at the madman and don't think that God is important. So as a result of this, he says that humans need to find our own way and to be preparatory people ready to live dangerously. He talks about this. And he says that these people who are going to be bold and make new morality are going to lead us, not the cynical atheists who are just going to stand around and laugh at everything. So why does he think this? Why does he say that God is dead? One theory is that the advancement of science means that people don't need a supernatural being anymore, or that God is unnecessary, seems unnecessary to people. But he knows, though, that the Christian church hasn't gone away and that people still believe in God and at his time. Because remember, this was in the late 1800s. There were still plenty of people going to church back then, a lot more than now. But to him, it was symbolic of the fact that people didn't identify their morality with God as much anymore, perhaps. And that's more, I think, what he's trying to say, rather than that people don't believe in God. It's more that they're not referring to God in their decisions and morality in the way that they used to. And the reasons why he thinks God is dead are maybe less important than what he thinks the consequences are of this supposed turning away. So you can kind of see where, if you think about what existentialism is, this idea that we can make our own way and that we can define our own essence. Nietzsche was sort of influential on the existentialists because of this idea that with God being gone, people have to take responsibility for their own lives. And he talks about affirming life and saying yes to things and accepting things, but also people to make their own meaning. He didn't want people to turn to nihilism. He didn't want people to believe in nothing. He didn't want them to give up on meaning at all. He just wanted them to make their own meaning and come up with something new and different. And that's what that whole preparatory man thing is about. So we'll kind of see how this development of existentialism continues in the next lecture.